Story of a Houston doctor is blowing up over on social media over racism. Now, the crew of a flight out of Detroit, it turns out they were skeptical that a black woman could be a doctor. I'm not kidding. This is a story. This is a story of a Houston OBGYN named Dr. Tamika Cross. Now, she was flying out of Detroit on a Delta flight when a man had become unresponsive. Now, being a human being and being a doctor, when she sees somebody that's unresponsive, her first instinct is to go and help, right? That's what you're gonna do. So she tried to go in to help him out, and the flight crew was like, no, you're not. Oh, no, you're not. And it has to do with racism. Now, here's her post on Facebook that describes this event in question. Quote, I'm sure many of my fellow young corporate American working women of color can all understand my frustration when I say I'm sick of being disrespected. Was on a Delta flight DL 945 and someone 2 rows in front of me was screaming for help. Her husband was unresponsive. Naturally, I jumped into doctor mode, and as no one else was getting up, unbuckle my seatbelt and throw my tray table up, and as I'm about to stand up, the flight attendant says, everybody stay calm. It's just a night terror. He's okay. He's all right. I continue to watch the scene closely. A couple minutes later, he is unresponsive again, and the flight attendant yells, call overhead for a physician on board. Okay. Now, of course, seeing him get unresponsive the second time, she's like, okay, end of this. I raised my hand to get attention, and she said to me, and you won't believe this. Oh no, sweetie, put your hand down. We're looking for actual physicians or nurses or some type of medical personnel. We don't have time to talk to you. Wow. Okay. So immediately, obviously, she does not have the best reaction to this. She said, I tried to inform her that I was a physician, but I was continually cut off by condescending remarks. Then overhead, they paged, any physician on board, please press your button. I stare at her as I go to press my button. Her response? Oh, you are an actual physician. I reply, yes. She then said, let me see your credentials. Let me see your credentials. What kind of doctor are you? Where do you work? Why were you in Detroit? Now, all of this is happening, by the way, while this man is still in need of help. And not only that, but she's actually blocking the row while from even standing up. Now she responds as respectfully as she could. OBGYN, work in Houston, in Detroit for a wedding. But believe it or not, they do have doctors in Detroit. Now, excuse me so I can help the man in need. Now, okay, so you think, okay, look, there's a misunderstanding going on here. She doesn't believe I'm a doctor. I am OBGYN here. Here's all my stuff, right? Then you think, okay, well, now obviously she knows the answer. She's going to get out of the way and let me help this person. No, it gets worse. See, a white male approaches the row and says he is also a physician. She says to me, thanks for your help, but he can help us, and he has his credentials. Now, mind you, she says he has not shown anything to her, just showed up and, quote, fit the description of a doctor. I stay seated, mind blown, blood boiling. Man is responding to questions and is seemingly better. So the guy who's was unresponsive, he's now starting to feel a little bit better. Then, later on, the flight attendant went and asked what to do about 10 minutes later. She tells her we need vitals and blood sugar. She comes back to report a BP of 80/50. Now that is, I'm not a doctor, but that seems rather low. And they can't find a way to measure his blood glucose. We continued on that pathway of medical workup, but the point is she needed my help, and I continued to help despite the choice words I had saved up for her. The patient and his wife weren't the problem. They needed help, and we were mid-flight. She came and apologized to me several times and offered me sky miles. I kindly refused, This is going higher than her. I don't want sky miles in exchange for blatant discrimination. Whether this was race, age, gender discrimination, it's not right. She will not get away with this, and I will still get my sky miles. So that's the post. Now, in doing this story, it has 12,000 likes and over 5,000 shares on social media. Now, the point of doing this story is to point out that racism isn't always people shouting the N-word or wearing pointy hats, right? It also involves things that are not as overt. Things like implicit bias. Now, implicit bias is essentially we have these preconceived notions, these stereotypes, and when somebody doesn't fit that stereotype, it confuses you, and you don't believe it. In this case, saying, oh, put your hand down, sweetie, we're looking for an actual physician, when somebody who's a physician, who does have medical training, raises her hand. Now, why did that happen? Because she was black. As if a black person can't be a doctor. That is the implicit bias. See, then there were the questions. Oh, you claim to be a black doctor? Well, let me see your credentials. What type of doctor are you? Where do you work? Why were you visiting Detroit? I mean, as if any doctors would ever go to Detroit. And that's the other part of it, right? And if there isn't enough evidence in there for you to show that this is implicit bias, the white guy who, look, he wanted to help, bless his heart, and he happened to look like what you think a doctor would look like, walks up, offers to help, and he gets no questions, doesn't have to show any credentials or do anything like that. That's implicit bias. The guy walks up, says, no, I'm a doctor. He looks like a doctor, a white guy, older guy. Oh, we believe it. Because that implicit bias tells us that black women obviously cannot be a doctor. That is bias. Now, I'm not saying throughout all of this, this flight attendant is a terrible person. Like, I understand that this woman is mad. I'd be angry too if I were in position. But I'm not going to blame the flight attendant, right? I'm not going to say that she's like some racist, Klan member or, somebody that wears a KKK hat. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that she obviously has this implicit bias. Something happened in this situation where it triggered her bias and that she, for some reason, needed more confirmation that this was an actual doctor, that she was who she says she was. Because I think, in my opinion, society does not see successful black people, especially successful or women, African-American women, being successful like that. Now, it is no wonder that this story is going viral. Now, what I think, my opinion on this whole thing, what I think we should do is that instead of getting angry, right? And I know that's the natural response, but let's all try to look at our own implicit biases and recognize that a lot of us tend to do this. A lot of us have these notions based on stereotypes. We need to look at these and go, do we actually have a bias? And recognize when that kicks in and try to check ourselves, to catch ourselves before we do something like this that obviously, is not a very nice thing to do to somebody who was volunteering to try to help another person and had the experience and expertise to be able to do such a thing. We have to break ourselves of these stereotypes and this implicit biases. And this story is a good example of why. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent, non-corporate media, go to our Patreon page and become a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation.